say maybe used against you in a court of law now, we're recording.
That's a good warning.
Yeah.
We're not signing anything, are we? Brought my glasses so I could really see and hear you at the same time.
Yeah.
Be careful, there's a cord right there.
Let's do it now.
I need to call my cousin about it, because she was not doing well the last time I contacted her. Get in touch with her again.
She lives in Houston?
No, she lives in Tilden.
Oh, Tilden, yeah.
It's
I was
not
ever
far
there.
from a little community called Beeville.
Yeah, that's right. I'm not sure I was ever in downtown Tilden.
Yeah, you know what, they've got a traffic light in downtown Tilden
Is it
now.
true?
Oh, it may be more than one now, it's been
Yeah.
a few years.
You know, they've been, doing a lot of drilling down there, oil well drilling, and they put in a
No
traffic
shoes,
light.
no strip, no lacing.
No laces, yeah, right.
Well, that's for the foreigners that come in. Alright. This is lecture number 2. I missed the first one.
This is, oh, yeah, and
He
it
told
was
about his,
fascinating.
his career designing, what, operating rooms and
Well, it was, had to do with the
Baby.
NICU,
NICU.
hospital, areas.
Is that the angel tree down along the coast?
And it was absolutely amazing,
see the
all the
big
things
ham
that
give us
he.
call.
Yeah, right, well, I'm glad you're up.
Equipment.
Where he's in Africa and,
Hello.
you know, all over.
Hello,
Hello,
have a seat.
thank you.
Our friend's daughter is the, head nurse in the NICU downtown, Prisma. And when she heard about it, she just really wanted to have been there. Yeah, because of the history of the equipment she works with every day. Yeah.
The pictures of some of the early equipment would look terrible.
You ever seen that computer they had at MIT? You've seen pictures of that?
What?
The computer they had at MIT?
Oh, yeah,
You've seen pictures of that?
yeah.
Took up a whole room.
Room full. Well, the first computer I ever had in dealings with had one room with computing equipment and one room of cooling equipment.
I bet.
And the room was about the size of this one.
I know.
There's the best place, just a bell.
Of course, it
Yeah,
didn't have
if
much
you want to, that's fine.
internal memory. Everything was all reels of tape,
Oh,
and
yeah.
you had the whole wall was full of reels of tape.
Oh, okay.
It was all
Oh, yeah, I can see
a
that.
subfloor, or a floor, a raised floor, because all the wiring and
Okay, yeah,
had to go underneath it.
that's good. Now I can't make smart remarks.
I know, it's a hot mic.
Yeah.
And the tubes made so much heat, the tubes that were in it had made so much heat, it required a big room full of air conditioning. And all it did really was tabulate.
You know, when my husband died, he had his own business. I found it, a lot of the stuff I was throwing away.
Check your
Some of
tickets,
it before
please.
you walk
Check
out,
your
it's
tickets.
Punch card.
That's good. Right.
And I don't know where they kept them.
Thanks again for
You know, some of them were old.
I'll go back on
I remember told me one time that they drove.
What's the what, Wolfgang?
Oh, that's good. Then you won't, then I'll know I can, oh, heck, if you take one in here. Are you? I see you from a distance all the time.
I've been in Congress.
We'll shut this door. It drives me crazy when that door's open.
Once you put them together to the computer, they told me, if you ever
It's-
drop, well, you're picking them up.
Well, she didn't tell me
And I
what
don't-
they did.
I don't care if anybody gets up, that never even bothers me. Or phones go off, I don't care.
Every one of them had to be punched. Just right.
You could see better.
And if you did punch it just right, it kicked the whole thing off.
When you wanna start. Nobody's sitting in the box seats yet.
I'll get in front of you, you can see over my head. You know, if you were sitting in the seats.
Oh, no, you
That is the tree down on the coast. Steve, what's the name of that tree? Angel tree. The angel tree. It's south of Charleston on one of the islands. I don't know which one. I get all the islands mixed up, but yeah, it's
Isn't it on
unbelievable.
John's Island? That tree.
It is.
No, I'm not familiar with it.
And it's really hard to get a picture like that because so many people come to visit it and have picnics under it and all that sort of thing, where there was nobody there, but the light was
We
still.
went to Charles, we went to.
It's a very unique tree.
Yeah, it is. It really is.
Uh-huh.
Yes. And I'll send you get that email.
All the trees.
If I say something wrong today, you guys feel free to stand up and correct it. Make notes of this.
Always had to go out in the woods to make my Easter egg nest.
No, I can sit over there.
We may get down there by
Oh,
now.
okay. I'll have it all ready for you.
Just say that secret. Sometimes it's just hard for us to make up our mind. I don't
Never
know.
dawned
What
on
causes
me
that?
that Easter bunnies getting out and lay eggs.
John's Island.
And they
Sorry?
were.
I think that would be a fun tree.
John's Island.
John's Island, okay.
Absolutely.
The tree is
You go
on
down
John's
first and
Island.
get gifts.
Thank you. Everybody must have a Google.
We're in John's Island.
Pass by, and there's a room.
What kind of tree
She's
is it?
in C-106.
It's an oak.
Working on it.
Oh,
Yeah.
She's gonna face the.
Did you climb that tree down?
Did I climb it?
But
Yeah, that lower, see that lower branch in the far back
Stop down
there?
there.
there's a wall.
I jumped right over.
There's a lamp post.
You want me
right
to dim the
there.
lights just slightly so we don't have a glare on the.
Sure.
And then she's gonna do lights.
You know what to do best, Amy.
Get those blackout curtains. I had to put one up in my bedroom because of that light outside.
Is that better?
Oh, yeah.
How are you?
Does that work better for everybody?
Not too low.
I see you every other day.
So these lights work, but for some reason the other lights on the stage aren't working, so is that okay? You can see
Yeah.
okay with these lights?
Yeah, this is
What's
fine.
his full name, Luther?
Right.
I thought it might be a nickname, but I wasn't sure. Okay. Luther Ewing Smith.
Are you all ready to start?
2 o'clock, hold the dot.
Don says, roll it. And I don't mind, I said earlier to somebody, but I don't care if your cell phones are on, I don't care if they ring, I don't care if you have to get up and go to the bathroom. I do need a volunteer. What are you doing there? You're supposed to be at a ball game, aren't you?
I thought this would be much more interesting.
All right, well, glad to have you, glad to have you. We have some visitors from off of Rolling Green campus with us, and that's nice that they're here today. Come on in, there's still good seats right up front in the box seats.
Is this a room of free beer? Is there?
Yeah, afterwards, count on it, please.
Yes, Dawn's
So, I don't mind those kind of interruptions at all. I've spent my career talking to doctors and their buzzers and beepers, and they got up and in and out all the time. Doesn't bother me a bit, so feel free. I do need a volunteer. Who's most likely to fall asleep during this? I need a timekeeper, and with 20 minutes to go in this hour, so at 2:40, I want somebody to raise a hand, set off a buzzer, throw over a chair or something that tells me I gotta start wrapping up. Because I know a number of people are here to, they wanna hear, carrying forward from my presentation about my occupation, they wanna hear more about what I did with the mafia. And I wanna leave time for that, but I'm leaving it toward the end so that you don't get up and walk out. And there's a guy outside, won't let you out now. And so if somebody can, all right, who's gonna be that volunteer? All right, thank you very much, I appreciate that, because I can tend to chase rabbits and lose track of time. So those that were here last time, thank you for coming, and that was about my profession. I worked in the medical field, planning and building hospitals. This is not that kind of a lecture. This is more like a prairie home companion conversation of stories. And it's the prequel. It's about me growing up. So we're gonna do like, was that Star Wars that did one and then did a prequel and catch up from there. So it's gonna be my life growing up. And I'll just ask you right off the bat, is there anybody here that feels like they were raised as a free-range child? Nobody? Ah, got one. All right. When I have said that to people in the past, they often say, oh, me too. And you can define that any way you want. So I don't argue, but you'll probably get a drift of what I'm talking about as we go through and tell a few stories here today. I truly believe I was a free-range child. A little bit like the game of Clue, I'm going to introduce some characters, 5 of them in particular that were most involved in raising me. They were responsible for me, we'll put it that way. I wasn't easy to be responsible for, but they were. And I want to put this in a time frame because my growing up was broken into 3 segments. The first one was the age 0 to 9, where I was born in Cleveland, Ohio, and lived on a small street in the city that dead-ended into Lake Erie. In fact, not only did I live on that street, but of the 36 houses on the street, at some point or other, I had relatives that lived in more than 20 of them. So it was like a big community there, parents and grandparents, etc. The second stage we'll move into is at age 9 when my family decided to move to Miami, Florida. So we left that inner city blue-collar neighborhood in Cleveland, Ohio, and moved to a very suburban, almost rural development in South Miami on the edge of the Everglades. And I lived there through my 11th year in high school. So this was from 5th grade to 11th grade, I lived in Miami, Florida. Very different environment. I got into very different trouble. At which point, and I can later tell you a pretty good reason for it, my parents decided to move back to Cleveland, to the very same neighborhood, not the same street, but the same neighborhood that we had lived in and that I had grown up in before. And that took me from age 16 till I went off to college. And so I had a senior year in Cleveland and a different school, and went off to college and came back in the summertime to work new jobs. So I lived in that house for another 3 years in the summertime from college. So there's these 3 sort of different gaps in this. So if I can figure out, yeah, whoops, I went too fast. So that's me, and I just want to report that my mother passed away years ago, And so nobody can argue with me that she thought I was the absolute best baby ever. I think that's different than being a big baby, which I still can be. But I was almost 10 pounds. But she, and I don't know how that made my brother feel. He was 6.5 years older. He wanted a brother so much so he told my mother not to come home from the hospital unless she had a brother. And lucky for her, I was there, but I got labeled the best baby ever. Just, you know, growing up there, around relatives and so forth. Whoops, that's my brother and I. Whoops, this is touchy. That's my brother and I getting ready for church outside of my grandmother's house on that same street in Cleveland. And my mother ended up living in that house until she was almost 90. So it was a family home that the family lived in, various family members. For a while, my grandmother rented it out to people, and then my mother ended up moving back into the house. She was married in the living room of that house. But every Sunday, my mother would dress us up, and my grandfather would come get the two of us and take us to church, which was a Presbyterian church. We walked. We walked to everything. It's a city. We walked to school. In fact, we had no cafeteria at my elementary school. We walked home for lunch and went back to school for the afternoon. We had all the stores we needed right at the end of the block on the boulevard, which was a U.S. highway, actually. It was the main passage along the lake in and out of Cleveland. And we had a barber shop, a beauty shop, a laundry. We had a bakery, a drugstore, a small grocery store. We had the junk store, which the kids loved to go to because there was just junk there for pennies, and we could get something. So anyway, we had all that at the end of the street. My brother was an unusual fellow. He, well, I'll come back to him in a minute. Now, this is him a little older in Miami at the Parrot Jungle. Anybody been to the Parrot Jungle in Miami? Do you have a picture of yourself with parrots on your arms? I pedaled my bike, as Steve does. I pedaled my bike back and forth past it every day to go to 5th grade and 6th grade, and the parrots fly free. So every day I got to see these beautiful macaws flying over top of me as I was pedaling my bike to and from school. I had to pedal for 2 miles. There was no snow. I joined the band when I got a little older, so we're just looking at me growing up here a little bit. Whoops. And this is when I was about 14. I was a lifeguard at a swimming pool in Cabana Club, and I'll talk about that as well a little bit. So I look the same, right? The chest hairs are not nearly that dark. And this shouldn't be in there. That's much later when I got off the reservation. This is my dad. He was my hero. I was born in 46 after the war. My brother was born in 1940 before we really got involved in the war. So we had a world war between us. 6.5 years, but a world war. And it really impacted our personalities and how we do things. But anyway, when his birthday was December 7th, anybody know anything about that date? He was celebrating his birthday when they got the news that Pearl Harbor had been bombed. And like most of the young men back then, and he was one of the older ones, they pretty quickly volunteered to go and fight the war with the Japanese. He joined the Navy. He at the time had a degree in pharmacy and a degree in law. So he was both a lawyer and a pharmacist practicing law in a high-end firm at the top of a building in downtown Cleveland. He volunteered to go to the war. So they sent him to Ithaca, New York for training, officer training. And while he was in Ithaca, They called his name and a few other guys, and they got up and left the training room, and they announced that they were volunteering them into UDT. Anybody know what UDT was?
Yeah, underwater demolition?
Underwater Demolition Team was the T. They read his resume, they overlooked pharmacist and lawyer, and they found captain of swim team. Classic military, right? They needed at that moment swimmers. So he went off to the South Pacific, fought the war, was in many really dangerous situations and so forth. Won a Bronze Star and a Silver Star and, you know, all that kind of thing. He was really a war hero, and he was always mine. This is a, didn't think I'd get choked up. Sorry. This is a quill pen, which I have, which was used by the scribe to put his name in the book of the U.S. Supreme Court. So he was approved to bring cases before the U.S. Supreme Court. Really smart guy, really smart guy. And that's my parents together down in Florida. And this is my mother, much older. She lived to be 96 and a half, and she always dressed nice and looked good. Now, anybody tell me who this is?
Andy Warhol.
Andy Warhol, very good. You're getting a good grade, got a plus. A lot of people don't recognize it from the painting. Another version of him is here. And I want to talk about my first job, because I was Andy Warhol's drug supplier. Oh, I don't want to go to this yet. When I was 5, my father owned 2 drugs. I didn't know you could do that. He was a pharmacist. He owned 2 drugs, and they were manufactured in some manufacturing facility and shipped to our home in bulk. And my job was to count pills into a bottle. One of these drugs was called Obitrol, and the other one was called Milidona. I don't know what Milidona did, but Obitrol was an antidepressant weight loss post-pregnancy drug. And I learned to count by counting pills, I was 5, into the bottles at the kitchen table. And my mother would stuff the cotton in them, you didn't have to secure everything back then, just put a cap on it. She repackaged them into boxes of 12 to 15 and shipped them to pharmacies that had ordered them. So it went through the pharmacy, but it went through me first. And I learned to count by doing that. What I didn't know was that Andy Warhol considered this to be his #1 go-to hallucinogenic drug. And in fact, he labeled the term Warholing. No, he labeled the term Obitrolling for the drug Obitrol. And he called it Obitrolling. So when he went and Obitrolled, he was about to start painting. And he painted on that drug. He didn't know I had packaged it for him. But that was my first job. I don't remember getting paid anything for it. Every summer we took a trip. The court system in Cleveland closed in the month of June every year for the whole month. And I mean, June 1, my dad had the car packed, the boat hooked up, he was ready to go. And he wanted to always go somewhere where he couldn't be reached. So we would go to some remote area in Canada every year. No phones, no electricity, no running water, none of that kind of stuff, and nobody could find us. My brother and I loved it. We took a canoe along with us, my brother's canoe. My dad had his Lyman outboard with him, and he'd go fishing. And we were just set free, basically, to paddle around, do whatever. We stayed the most at a little camp where the man had built log cabins, and he had about maybe 8 or 10 log cabins. And we had one, we went to the same one every year. My job was to go to the pump at the well and pump water into buckets and bring it up to the house. My brother's job was to get ice from the ice house where it had been sawdusted down and bring it for the ice box. And my mother's job was minimal cooking. My dad liked to do the cooking while, give her a break as well. But we cooked on a wood stove. But I will tell you, when my mother made a blueberry pie that had been just picked blueberries on a wood stove, I mean, you could not ever find anything better than that. It was wonderful. I enjoyed it a lot. Right across the river. Now remember, this was the day of cowboys and Indians. It was popular on TV. And at home, I had my set of 6 guns and my spurs and my vest and my hat and played this all the time. But in Canada, we actually had an Indian village right across the creek from our cabin. And when I say Indian village, it consisted of teepees. It was nothing but teepees and fires going and so forth. And so my brother and I would roll the canoe down and get in it. And we'd paddle past the Indian village, looking at all the little Indian kids playing and everything along the way. They had their canoes up on the bank. And it was, I can't tell you the feeling that I would get as a kid. The idea that I was in a place where this was actually happening. These were real people. I was a real person sitting there, and it was just really special, really special. The second half or part of our Canadian trip would usually be spent at a cabin that my father's best friend, another attorney from Cleveland, owned. He couldn't buy an island in Canada because he's not a Canadian citizen. So he rented for a lifetime an island. And it was a decent sized island. And he had somebody build a cabin for him on the island, and we would go there and stay. But we had to park our car 12 miles from that island and put our boat in and everything we wanted to take with us. My dad would give a box of cigars to the Indian chief whose property it was, so he would see that nothing happened to the car while we were gone. And we had to go 12 miles by boat through all these islands and channels and things to find this cabin. It was no problem for my dad. He was a, Navy guy that found places in the dark. But it was quite a trip. When we got there, Ollie was the name of the fellow that owned the cabin. He had a little dinghy, a little flat-fronted dinghy with a 3-horsepower Johnson motor on it and a gas can. Every now and then you had to stop and refill the motor on the top. And my brother, he had a friend with him this year. This is a couple of years after the story I'm going to tell you, but I wanted to show you the boat so that you got an idea. This was no big boat. And so when I was much older than 5, when I was packaging pills, I was 6. Here at this cabin, my father gave me a list of things that he wanted from the trading posts. Now the trading post was only 6 miles away. Not the distance we had to go clear back, but it was 6 miles away. And Ollie had a daughter named Jeannie, who was 2 or 3 months older than me. And my father put me and Jeannie in that boat with the 3-horsepower motor on it in remote Canada. And he gave us a list and he gave us some money. And he handed me a flaming orange paddle, a paddle that was painted in neo-orange. And he said, if you feel like you don't know where you are or you've gotten lost, he said, don't keep going, stop. Take this paddle and stick it in the shore. And he said, and I'll find you. And shoved 2 6-year-olds off into the Canadian wilderness with the moose and the occasional bear and the wolves and the perils. There would be nothing between us and the trading post. There were no other cabins, no other people. You rarely ever saw another boat. And we started off, the two of us, in this little boat. We worked our way through the islands, and we actually found our way to the trading post, which we were pretty proud of. And when we got there, we bought the bread and the milk, only to find out that the bread boat hadn't arrived yet. They didn't get any, they weren't on a road of any kind, so they got all their supplies by boat. And that we'd have to wait a while for the bread and milk to arrive, which, you know, we had no problem with. And we were sitting there, 2 6-year-olds, and thinking, we bought our bread and our milk, and we've still got some money. What should we do? What would you have done? Candy. Yeah, that wasn't a long guess, was it? Candy. We decided we'd have some candy, treat ourselves. After all, we're pretty proud we got there by ourselves. And so we bought candy, and we sat and ate candy for about half an hour until the trade boat came and had the bread and the milk, and we grabbed that up. We went down to this little boat to get in it, got in the boat, getting ready to go, and then I saw the gas can. The rest of the money was supposed to be to buy gas so we could get home. So we had to take the bread and the milk back up to the trading post and trade it back in for gas. We got a can of gas, and somehow we made it on back. I'll tell you a trick my dad taught me. He said, Don, if you're ever on a long walk or you're in a boat around islands and things, he said, every time you go around a corner or it comes to a split, he said, turn around and look at what's behind you, because that's what you're going to see on the way back. Is there a weird looking tree? Is there a certain rock formation? Whatever is there. And I always did that. I've done it all my whole life. And that worked out well, because going back, everything looked different. And we wound our way back, and we got home safely, except we had no bread and no milk, which was the primary goal of the trip. My dad was not mad. I think my mother at that point had probably beat him into a pulp for having sent us, and he was just glad we showed up. So that was rather free range of us. And that was my second job after counting pills. We didn't get paid. We got paid in candy for this one. But I wanted to tell you about my first plane ride while we were in Canada. We'll cover that here. I had never been on an airplane in my life. And again, at the ripe age of 6, we were in a trading post that was accessible by road on one side, and the back side it had docks. And my brother and my father were inside. They had 2 shopping lists, one for each family, because my cousin was along. My cousin's name was Tom also, but we called him Stony. His middle name was Stone. So we called him Stony. And Stony and I had nothing to do, so we went down to the docks to just nose around, see what's going on by the lake. And here we came across a float plane that was tied to the dock. I had never seen one in my life. And so we started asking the pilot, as all little kids do, you know, hey, mister, you know, how does that thing go around? You know, well, you don't have wheels, how do you land? I don't know. We asked stupid questions. And after a while, he said, look, he says, if you two want to take a plane ride, he said, it'll cost you $2. Well, my cousin Stoney he was almost 10 years old. He had $2. His dad was a doctor. And I didn't have any money. So I went back up to the trading post, and I did one of those things where my dad was at the counter and I was tugging on his pants and said, hey, Dad, can I have $2 to ride the airplane? And my brother was a witness to this. And eventually he just like, yeah, here you go. Here's $2. Get out of here. And I think he thought this is just in my mind, but I think he thought that it was one of these things like a motorcycle or a little speedboat where you put a quarter in it and you could ride it. Because I mean, $2 and an airplane ride, that doesn't fit. But no matter what he thought, I went back down to the docks. I had $2. Tony had $2. We got on an airplane with a guy, I have no clue who he was. And he started up the engine and we took off. Into the Canadian wilderness.
Oh.
It was wonderful, I loved it. But shortly thereafter, my father had finished his shopping list and he turned to my brother and he said, "Where's Donald?" Tom says, "Well, Dad, you gave him $2 to ride the airplane." He said, "Well, where's the airplane?" And my brother said, "I don't know, they took off about 10 minutes ago." As a parent, you have to put your parent hat on now and picture what your first thought would be when you realize you not only sent your son, but your nephew off into the Canadian wilderness with some unknown person, some unknown destination in an airplane. Any thoughts? Your second thought is going to be how you explain this to their mothers. He had no idea. And he didn't know if he were coming back or what was going to happen. So they waited asking questions. Anybody know who this guy is, et cetera, et cetera. And about 15 minutes later, we came buzzing back. And again, I can tell you it was a heck of an experience. I thought it was fantastic how those airplanes can come in and they sink a little bit before they come back up, spraying water everywhere. It was wonderful, and to see the wilderness from the air like that was something else very special. My first plane ride, again, my dad did not chew us out. I did everything by the book. I asked his permission. He gave me money, and I went on my own. And so that was my first plane ride, and that was in Canada as well. We really went into a lot of strange places in Canada. We explored. We really did explore. My brother and I could go on with a list of things that we almost got in serious trouble with and figured out and somehow got home. But I want to move now to Florida a little bit, and I'm going to talk to you something that is classically sort of Floridian that you wouldn't know growing up in Ohio. In the first year that we lived down there, now my brother, remember, he was 6.5 years older. I was 9, so he was mid-teenage years, and he found friends, and I rode around with his friends and did things with them. But he decided they were going camping, and so my cousin Stoney again, he was often in the picture, and 2 other friends of my brother's, and they took me with them to go camping on Chicken Key. Chicken Key, I think I have a picture of it. Oh, I didn't show you this isn't the float plane, this is a float plane. But it was a pretty cool ride. This is Chicken Key. This is just off the coast of Miami, Florida, south of the city in Biscayne Bay. And you can see from this picture, there is a kind of a channel cut through here. There was some kind of a power plant or something at that time. None of that existed. That was all just mangrove swamp. And we would drive in somebody's car down to this, there was a road that came down to the end, and we would swim across that channel. And that's a sandbar there. That whole thing is a gigantic sandbar where the water level, depending on the tide, was anything from about 18 inches deep to maybe 3 feet deep. And we had gigs, and we would walk around in the sandbar watching for shadows of stingrays and sharks and things that would be in the sandbar moving along. And then we'd circle around, we'd throw our gigs. I'm sorry, ladies, if it is a guy thing. It was just something to do. And we'd try and catch a ray or a shark. We did often, but we were gonna spend the night there this time. It was the first time we'd ever done that. Chicken Key is, how big would it be? Probably maybe the length of Building F here, lengthwise, and not very wide. And we put our gear, we took nothing with us. It was one night, right? What could happen? We each had something to sleep on, a hammock, a cot, a sleeping bag, something in case it got cold. This is Miami, you know, weren't expecting that. And we went out and played. In fact, during that day, my cousin Stoney and I almost died in quicksand. I didn't know there was, I only saw quicksand in the movies, and it was always in a jungle. But it turns out, as I learned later, we were about here walking on, we usually walked around on this side. We're out here walking around on the sandbar, and all of a sudden we were both being sucked into the sand. Now it was already about 12 to 18 inches deep in water, so you didn't have to go down too far before it was gonna cover your head. And it was just fortunate we were together, because we grabbed each other and we started pulling each other up, but it was a seesaw. If I pulled him up, I went down, and if he pulled me up, he went down. And we worked and worked at this for at least 15 or 20 minutes, just trying to stay above the water. And at one point we got to where we each had the sand only up just below our knees, and we'd pump our legs. As soon as we'd get up high enough that we could do it, we'd pull our legs and pump our legs to try and stay on top. And we finally both got off of the sand, of the area of the quicksand, and back onto the sandbar, and we were good. And in boy land, if you survived, it was great. It was a good story, you know, and you didn't think much about it. You didn't really, I can't even think the next day thinking back, hey, you know, I almost died. You just move on. I don't know. Yeah.
How old were you?
Well, I would have been 10 at the time. Yeah, after we moved to Florida. We moved there when I was 9, so I probably was 10. And so we went into Chicken Key. I guess we packed sandwiches. We had nothing to light a fire with. We didn't have a flashlight, nothing. And we ate our sandwiches or whatever, and we got I had a little cot that my dad had when he was in the Boy Scouts. It was one of these spring-loaded things where you kind of press down and shove a rod through a hole on both sides, and when you put it down, it was only about that far from the ground, and when you laid in it, it was about this far from the ground. And but it was comfortable, nice comfortable. One guy had a hammock, and we all went to sleep because there was nothing else to do in the dark. And somewhere around midnight, a tropical storm blew in. Well, we didn't have a weather report. We didn't know what was going to happen. It was a beautiful day, and it had torrents of rain. I mean, unbelievable sheets of rain. And you've seen those weather reports where the guys stand up there with the microphone doing this. We were doing that on Chicken Key, except we couldn't see anything. It was pitch black. Couldn't see the hand in front of your face. Had no flashlights. I was now sleeping in a swimming pool because it just collected all the water. My sleeping bag had soaked into a gigantic wet burrito. And the other guys weren't any better off. Wherever they were sleeping, however they did, we couldn't even communicate with each other because the noise was so loud from the wind that was blowing. We just literally, 5 guys in isolation of each other, sleeping through a tropical storm, soaking wet. I was freezing. And there's a funny thing happens in tropical storms. You hear them talk about it when they talk about hurricanes coming. Anybody think of what that might be? The high tide, the storm surge.
Oh, no.
They always want to talk about the storm surge. I can tell you about the storm surge because as that surge happened during the night, Chicken Key became about half the size of this room with 5 guys on the highest spot and anything else that breathed air was with us in pitch black, and I felt them bumping back and forth in under my cot all night long. Didn't know if they were big rats or raccoons or possums or what, and just hoped they decided not to get in with me. They were good with that because I was better cover than above the cot. So I laid there in chills all night long. It was one of my longest nights I'd ever spent. I've been in worse, but that was, for that age, the worst one. And finally day broke, storm ended. By morning, sun came up. You'd have never known this happened. The tide had receded. It also took our boats with it, but we had a canoe and a kayak that we used to get there. They were gone. And all of us guys were just like, oh, what the heck was that? And yeah.
3 minutes.
Okay, 3 minutes, good, thank you.
3 minutes.
Appreciate it. So anyway, I'm gonna move on from Chicken Key, but that was another adventure that I had, and did not think of the high tide for sure. We had a lot of adventures at Chicken Key. My first paid job in Cleveland, when I was in the 6th grade, the end of my 6th grade, it was so hot in Miami. I hated the summer times down there. So my parents sent me to live with my grandmother. Let's see if I have a picture of her. There she is. My grandmother, Edna Olive, and her last name was Gerspacher. She went by Smith. She almost couldn't do banking one day because she went in to do it under the name Gerspacher, and they said, I'm sorry, Mrs. Smith, but you cannot. My mother and her going someplace, I don't know where. And I'll introduce my Uncle Hank. My Uncle Hank was a musician. He was several things. He had a degree in pre-medicine from Miami of Ohio. He was a master plumber because he was the third, at least, in a generations of plumbers. And but he was born a child prodigy in music. When I say born, I don't know how else you explain it, but at age 6, he was sitting at the player piano where he would sit and watch the keys go up and down. And my grandmother was playing Peter and the Wolf on a piano roll, according to her, while she worked in the kitchen. And after a while, she thought, that's odd. I thought that piano roll would be done by now. So she went out to investigate and found my uncle sitting there playing Peter and the Wolf on the piano at age 6. He went on to play literally every musical instrument. He substituted on bassoon for the Cleveland Orchestra. He wrote music for movies in Hollywood. He wrote operas, but he was known as the jazz man around Cleveland, Ohio. And he could have been very famous. He could have had a label, but he didn't want to play the way the labels wanted him to play. He had his way, and he wasn't going to conform to what they thought would sell. And so he just was happy. He played with Jimmy Dorsey's big band and other groups in his life. Pretty interesting guy. But being a musical prodigy means you're really not very good at focusing on other things. And he was supposed to be running the family business, the East Shore Motel up in Cleveland, Ohio, that his father had built. Instead, my grandmother was running it. She was living in the upstairs above the lobby area, and she basically did it and covered for him. This is an old picture. It was called the Pink Motel. And they eventually built a cabana club with a swimming pool back behind it, which I managed and so forth on summer times when I was up there as I grew up. But my first job was, I was given a pair of gloves and a 10-pound sledgehammer. And my job was to go back to the very back of the property where there was a pile of cement slabs that had been taken from under a cottage, a large cottage that they had moved onto a new foundation. And this pile was there. The reason it was such a daunting job was because my grandfather, who had access to old buildings, when he was building it, put you remember the elevator doors that opened and closed with the spring kind of a thing? He had a bunch of those and he put them into this cement as rebar. You couldn't break that cement up. So I spent 6 weeks, 50 cents an hour, with that and a pair of gloves, pounding on cement. I just finished 6th grade, so it was the summer between my 6th and 7th year. And so all in all, I figured I spent about 200 hours swinging that sledgehammer on that cement. I could hit it about 10 or 12 times before the first crack would come up, and then finally a chunk would fall off, and I'd lay it aside into a pile by the edge of the creek. And I reduced that pile of cement slabs to little chunks over 6 weeks. They paid me 50 cents an hour. I took home 60 bucks that I put in my college fund. The other 60 I spent on stuff during the summer. I had benefits. I had room and board. My grandmother at the end of the year took me out and bought me new school clothes to send me home with, and so forth. But when I started 7th grade, when I got home, I didn't realize the unintended consequence was I was by far the strongest kid in school. I mean, not even close. I was stronger than most of the teachers. And I didn't even realize this was happening. And it changed a lot about what I did from that point forward. Number one, I couldn't play sports with the kids my own age because it kept hurting them. And so I went up to the University of Miami where my brother was going to college already, and I'd play sports up there or pick up sports with the guys. I played with two Hall of Famers up there, Rick Barry in basketball and Jim Hendricks in football, 2 guys that are in the Hall of Fame. I had no problem playing, if you can believe it, and I was just starting 7th grade. And so I followed my brother around from there on through most of that. While I was in Cleveland in these summers, I spent time with my uncle, who would occasionally take me with him to some place where the musicians who were in Cleveland in town would meet and jam after they did their shows. And that was kind of neat. I met Ella Fitzgerald, I met Dizzy Gillespie, a lot of the famous musicians back then who would meet in the basement of a bar someplace afterwards, and they could play music they wanted to play, not the stuff that was, they were expected to play in the concerts. And it was very interesting. One night, I was living that summer in an abandoned, well, it wasn't abandoned, it was an unfinished nightclub. In the very back of the property, my uncle was building a nightclub, but he didn't have a liquor license yet. And they gave me a mattress in a room, well, about half the size of this room was the main nightclub, and then there was a little one off to the side, like our dining room is upstairs. And I put a mattress on the floor in the dining room, and that's where I slept that summer when I was doing my work. But it was creepy. I took some adjusting to be by yourself, totally isolated like that at that age. But one night I was sound asleep, as only a teenager can, and all of a sudden there was this boom, 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 and I sat straight up in bed, and took me a few minutes to get the cobwebs out and realized there was a guy sitting there playing the drums about 30 feet from me. And he had just hit the drum and the rim shot and the whole thing, and then a whole bunch of other guys, they set up to do their jam session there because it was available. And believe it or not, the guy on the drums was Gene Krupa. So my alarm clock was Gene Krupa. I gotta move on. I gotta stop these Cleveland stories. But they feed into the mafia. And people have wondered what I did. At the age of 14, I spent the summer living with a professional comedian. I didn't know him, my uncle knew him. He lived in one of the motel rooms, the very back corner. And it was just a standard old motel room with 2 single beds and a bathroom. And he was living there permanently, and they plunked me in there as his roommate for the summer while I did jobs around the motel. And his name was Lee Mervin, not Lee Marvin, the actor, Lee Mervin, the unknown comedian. And so he had a job, and in the middle of the night, he'd disappear for a while and come back. Finally, he said, "Don, you want to go with me?" He says, "I could really use the help." And I thought, okay, I'll go with you, Lee. So, the jobs I was doing during the daytime didn't require much brain, so I didn't need much sleep. And so between the hours of 1 and 4 in the morning, I would go with Lee, and we'd get in his car, and we would drive around to all the sleazy bars in Cleveland, because he collected coins and fixed the machines. What I didn't know at the time, really, was that the mafia controlled all of the machines. Pinball machines, pool tables, cigarette machines, you name it, they all belonged to the mafia. They put those machines wherever they wanted to put them. They would go into the owner of the establishment and say, tomorrow afternoon, we're gonna unload a cigarette machine, we're gonna put it right here in this corner. And you didn't have a choice. And you couldn't say, "Oh, I don't need one of those," or "I don't even like those things." You got it. And so we would go around and collect money, and believe it or not, an enormous amount of money from these machines at night. And so I became the strong man. Lee was a little guy, and I know that's why he needed help. I was sort of his bodyguard and the strong man. Remember, I came back really strong. I was a big kid for that age, and I carried all the money to the car in these sleazy neighborhoods. And then we'd go back and we'd sit in the motel room and we'd count it. I'd help them count it out, and then I got a cut of what was being counted. So I was being paid in mafia money, indirectly employed by Lee, but frankly, as a teenager, around 14, was working for the mafia as a muscle man. Now, there's a difference between the muscle man and the enforcer. Don't mix them up. The enforcer has muscles too, but the enforcer goes with a ball bat and makes sure things are done the way he wanted them to be done. His instructions. I didn't have to do that. We were never robbed, and it was always a mystery to me why not, until I found out it was mafia money. Everybody knew it but me, and and nobody wanted to touch it. Nobody wanted to touch it. But there was a lot going on that summer, and in fact for many years right about that time. I lived in it was called Collinwood. Went to Collinwood High School. It was by the Collinwood Railroad Yard, which was like, I don't know, they had like 22 tracks or something wide. And it was not just blue collar, it was blue collar and crime based. And I brought with me, I have a friend, Rick Torello. Rick wrote 3 books at some point in his life. The first one he wrote about his own grandfather, who was the original what they call him, the Godfather. He was the original Godfather of the Cleveland Mafia, his grandfather was. And he never met him because he got shot and killed along with 3 of his brothers. But that was during the Prohibition, what they called the Sugar Wars. They were battling over sugar for making illegal liquor at that time. And Rick later grew up and Well, he was a musician too. He played the drums for Sammy Davis Jr. for 3 years. Traveled with him all over the world, and then got tired of the traveling. From 18 to 21, he was Sammy's drummer. And then he came back and started a family and became a policeman. And when he did that, he got curious about his family, and he started doing all kinds of research. The second one he wrote was To Kill the Irishman. And I knew the Irishman, Danny Green. He was older than I was. He was more my brother's age. My brother played baseball with him in the local sandlot. And Danny was a bully from the beginning. And I don't know what was wrong with Danny. He got kicked out of a couple of schools and so forth. He eventually took over the Longshoremen's Union from the Mafia, which did not sit well. And they spent, and what this book is all about, they made a major motion picture out of it. What that book is about is the Mafia trying to kill Danny Green. Oh, I didn't mention when I was in Miami going to high school. This is Sylvia Hitchcock. We dated in high school. She went on to become Miss Alabama, Miss USA, and Miss Universe, which I didn't mention a lot. Sally knew it because we were together watching when she got crowned. Didn't know she was actually even in the event. And but as you all know, Sally's my Miss Universe. And in between that, down in Miami, I used to catch and sell poisonous snakes to the Serpentarium. It was a tourist attraction where they milked the snakes for the tourists that would come by, and he'd give us 50 cents a foot for any water moccasin over 3 feet in length. They were immature if they were under 3 feet in length, but and so we'd go out in the Everglades and with a grocery bag, and we'd collect 4 or 5 snakes, 3 or 4, and then we'd bring them back, and he'd give us the money. And right next door to the Serpentarium was the root beer stand, A&W root beer stand. And all I can tell you is none of that money ever made it past the root beer stand. We were always so thirsty. But this is Danny Green. Knew him, he was in the neighborhood, grew up there, real ruffian, took on the Mafia took on him, and it was a series of car bombs. There were over 30 car bombs in a period of a short number of years. They finally got Danny and blew him up, but the movie that they made, you can't read that probably, but it had Val Kilmer in it, Christopher Walken. I knew these guys. I knew the mobster guys. Green, I knew Chandra Burns. His name is actually Bernstein. I knew John Nardi. My mother saw John Nardi die. She worked for the Musicians Union. He was a partner of Danny Green's, and she was sitting at her desk one day, and this boom went up, and she got up and she walked to the window next to her and saw car parts falling out of the sky, along with parts of John Nardi, and that was the end of him. They brought in the Mafia. The Cleveland Mafia didn't know what to do, and they were very strong actually. Elliot Ness started in Cleveland, his career, you've heard of him. Paul Sorvino, Tony Fatboy Sorvino, he was in the New York Mafia. He was one of the big shots there. They finally went to him and asked him if he could help kill Danny Green. And he brought in 2 guys from California, from the Mafia in California. They're the ones that finally got Danny and got John Nardi. This guy, Chandra Burns, we had to keep him at the motel for about 2 months one time. The Mafia brought him to the motel after he had been in prison. And they knew that we owned this motel because my uncle would play at their weddings and celebrations and so forth. He played music. So they just brought Chandra straight from prison put him in a motel room there and said, don't tell anybody. Because there's bad things will happen if people find out. There was a hit out on him. And they brought him his food every day. They took care of him. He stayed there. We tried to keep it as quiet as we could, which wasn't easy with people coming and going and everything. But they finally got Chandra and took him out. And I guess that was the end of the problem for them. And so these guys were around. They all grew up. The third book he wrote was called Super Thief. And this was about a guy that was 2 years younger than I was. I went to school with him at Collinwood High School. And he was like a alcoholic is to a bar. He was to stealing. He couldn't resist stealing things. He was trained, he could do jobs. He didn't want to do jobs. He wanted money, he wanted it quick, and he learned to get better and better at stealing things. And he literally became so well known. The FBI considered him the greatest, Hall of Fame thief of all time. He stole $30 million out of the FBI bank in California. Put your thumb in the eye. He also spent 2 long terms in prison in Indiana, in the high security prison there. I've been there actually, where they took the Oklahoma City bomber and Terre Haute, Indiana, and I helped them plan a medical care unit for the prisoners there, and it's not a place you'd ever want to go in. It's creepy. It's really creepy. So my time with the Mafia was brief, but my growing up with the Mafia all around me was constant. We knew them, we saw them, we'd see them in Miami when we were living in Miami, in a cafe or something like that. So we knew where they were and what they were doing. I think that's all I talk about. My hour is about up. I have a teacup here, if you want to look at it. My parents owned a building in Coral Gables, Florida, which is just a suburb of Miami. And the building was the headquarters of the Bay of Pigs invasion. So we have a fairly strong history with that, with the Kennedys, and issues over whether the U.S. government was or was not behind the Bay of Pigs invasion. We had payroll lists of who got paid. And one of the things we found when we were given the building back by the CIA was a little teacup that they use. I guess that's chicory coffee or something that they would drink out of these cups. It wasn't tea, it's too small for that. I think it was really strong coffee. And a bunch of papers from it too. I've always wondered, maybe somebody here who knows Spanish knows the difference. What's the difference between no pase and no pasar? Anybody know?
They use it both ways.
It's the same thing.
Yes.
It's prohibited to pass or don't pass.
Ah, okay. Prohibitive to pass and just don't pass. Okay. Those these signs were laying around in the building when we got it back.
Applicants don't enter.
But I won't tell that story today. And see if I've left anything important on the table here. I don't think so. We talked about, I've got it upside down. No wonder we're going backwards. Oh, that was the car after John Narby was blown up. They put the bomb in the car next to him. And when he went to get in his, they set that one off and everything went up. And I won't go into Cuba. And I went off to university. And Sally and I met, and we did canoe dates, where we would I had my canoe at college with me, and we would cook breakfast in the morning on a sterno stove in the canoe on the Hocking River, and brought our books with us and studied and so forth. She could get glamorous too. By the way, there's a new scientific study out. don't know if you've heard about it, but ladies, they've studied it thoroughly, and they found out that having a little extra weight on means that you are going to live much longer than the guy who tells you you have a little extra weight. It's science. Thank you all for coming. I'm willing to stand here and answer.
I wonder if there's a series coming up.
Hey, Don, forgot to tell the stories about swimming in the Erie Lake.
Oh, you know, we've all lived a long time. I could go on for a long time, yeah. I have never talked about my time in Africa or the Middle East or any of those things, but, yeah, somebody had a question. Steve, was that you?
I forgot to tell the story about swimming in Lake Erie.
Oh, swimming, learning to swim in Lake Erie. That's another story too. Talk about dangerous.
I know, I've gotta make my way.
The scout had to determine whether the sheepheads were too thick to swim or thin enough we could push them aside. Thank you all again for coming.
Enjoy that.
Good.
I wanna be careful not get too close to you.
But something might blow up.
The mafia might find you. They don't give up.
Okay, and you put it on me. I tainted it.
You have to wear it all the time now.
Hey, that's it. Yeah.
Nice job, Don.
Thank you. Thank you. Anybody wants to look up the books on the TV? Yeah, it has a little bad language in it. The first thing what was
Yeah, 30 minutes. They lived in New York my whole life, then moved to South Carolina.
Yes,